A millionaire walks near the public hospital when he's approached by a 6-year-old little artist who begs, "Mister, please buy my painting. I really need money to buy medicine." When he looks at the artwork, his world collapses. The portrait is identical to his ex-wife, whom he divorced 7 years ago. When the girl explains who the woman she painted in the portrait was, he nearly faints. The grey Chicago afternoon weighed on Richard Mason's shoulders like a leaden shroud. The smell of disinfectant and the distant wail of sirens created a suffocating atmosphere as he walked briskly along the uneven sidewalk near the city's county hospital. His footsteps echoed on the cracked concrete, each one a beat in the rhythm of a life that had long lost its tempo of happiness. At 52, Richard carried the weight of a corporate empire built on the rubble of destroyed relationships. His obsession with work had become his armor against pain, but today, even the most critical meetings seemed insignificant in the face of the melancholy consuming him. The doctor's appointment he'd just left had unsettled him. Nothing serious, just the physical manifestation of years of stress and loneliness. His phone buzzed insistently in the pocket of his Italian suit. Another urgent call, another decision that couldn't wait. Richard sighed deeply, bracing himself for another afternoon lost in spreadsheets and reports, when a small, determined voice cut through the air like a blade. "Mister, please, will you buy my painting?" He stopped abruptly, his heart giving an irregular beat. A girl of about 6 stood before him, her bare feet planted firmly on the grimy sidewalk. Her clothes were worn but clean, and her dark eyes shone with a determination that belied her fragile age. "I really need the money for my mommy's medicine," the child continued, holding up a hand-painted canvas. Richard felt the world spin. The smell of fresh paint filled his nostrils, but it was the image on the canvas that made him stagger. There, painted with a child's innocence but a frightening precision, was the face that had haunted him for 7 years. Every line, every expression, every detail was identical to his ex-wife Marina. His hands began to tremble imperceptibly. How was this possible? How could a stranger, a child, have painted the face of the woman he had loved and lost? The resemblance wasn't just striking, it was impossible. How do you know this face?" His voice came out hoarse, almost a whisper. The girl tilted her head, confused by the well-dressed man's reaction. "That's my mommy. I paint her from memory because she's been in the hospital for a long time. My grandma says my paintings are pretty and that someone might want to buy one." Richard's heart hammered in his chest. "What's your mother's name?" "Marina Alvarez," the child answered matter-of-factly, oblivious to the fact that those 2 words had just shattered the world of the man standing before her. Time stopped. The distant sirens became a dull hum. The smell of disinfectant mingled with the scent of fresh paint, creating a combination Richard would never forget. Marina Alvarez. The same name, the same face, the same woman he had loved and lost to his obsession with work. A wave of nausea hit him. What if this child was his daughter? What if Marina was sick, needing money for medicine, while he lived in his luxury penthouse, oblivious that his own family might be suffering just a few miles away? The girl held the painting with both hands, waiting patiently for an answer. Her eyes had the same intensity he remembered in Marina, the same determination that had won him over years ago. Could it be that those eyes also carried a part of him? Richard swallowed hard, trying to regain his composure. Life had just presented him with a puzzle that could destroy everything he thought he knew about himself. One question echoed in his mind. Was he the father of this talented child, selling art on the street to buy medicine for her mother? Richard remained motionless for several long seconds, watching the child who patiently awaited his response. Reality seemed distorted, as if he were living a disturbing dream from which he couldn't awaken. The canvas in the girl's hands continued to stare at him with Marina's painted eyes, bringing back memories he had tried to bury for years. How much do you want for the painting? The question was automatic, his mind racing to process the situation. The child's eyes lit up with hope. Whatever you can give, sir. My grandma says we shouldn't name a price because everyone has their own means. The simplicity of the answer touched him deeply. Richard pulled his wallet from his pocket, his hand still trembling slightly. Inside was more cash than most people saw in a month. He pulled out a crisp $100 bill and held it out to the girl. Here, but you can keep the painting. I don't need it. The child's eyes widened at the sight of the money. Then she looked at the painting and finally back at Richard with an expression of determination that surprised him. No, sir. My grandma always taught me that nothing in life is free. If you're giving me money, you have to take the painting. I need to earn this money with my work. Richard felt a tightness in his chest. Even in a situation of extreme need, this child maintained a dignity and set of values someone had instilled in her. But I really don't need the painting, little one. Consider it a gift. No, she insisted, pushing the canvas toward his hands. Grandma says when we accept things for free, we lose the value of our work. I paint because I love it and because I need to help my mommy. You're buying my art, not giving me a handout. The child's words echoed in his mind like a voice from the past. Marina had always said similar things, always defended the importance of dignity and honest work. Was it a coincidence? Or had this girl inherited not only her mother's looks, but also her values? What's your name? Richard asked, finally taking the painting and tucking it carefully under his arm. Sophia, she answered with a shy smile. Sophia Alvarez. The last name confirmed his most terrifying suspicions. Richard felt his knees go weak, but he managed to maintain his composure. That's a beautiful name. How old are you, Sophia? 6, but I'll be 7 in 2 months. The math was cruel and precise. 7 years ago, he and Marina had separated after a terrible argument about his priorities. He had chosen a critical business merger over accompanying her to a doctor's appointment. The fight had been devastating, and Marina had walked out that night, telling him he only loved his work. Is your mummy very sick? The question came out laden with a concern he couldn't disguise. Sophia looked down, and for the first time, her brave facade showed cracks of fragility. She's been in the hospital a long time. The doctors say she needs some very expensive medicine, but we don't have the money. That's why I sell my paintings. Richard felt a physical pain in his chest. If his suspicions were correct, his own daughter was on the street selling art to pay for her mother's medicine, while he amassed millions in bank accounts. The irony was too cruel to bear. Where do you live? He tried to make the question sound casual, but there was an urgency in his voice. In the annex, with my grandma. It's a little far from here. But I come every day because the doctors said there are people near the hospital who might need paintings to take to sick people. The annex. Richard knew the area, one of the city's poorest neighborhoods, where houses were built one on top of the other on small lots. To think that his possible daughter lived there while he resided in a luxury penthouse on the Gold Coast was a reality he could barely process. Sophia, you come here every day. Almost every day. I only stay home when it rains hard or when my grandma isn't feeling well. Richard stored this information as if it were a treasure. Suddenly, that street corner near the hospital had become the most important place in the world to him. It was where his daughter, he was almost certain now she was his daughter, came daily to fight for her mother's life. Thank you for the painting, Sophia. It's truly beautiful. The girl smiled, and in that smile, Richard saw a reflection of himself that made him tremble. Thank you, sir. You're very kind. As Sophia ran off toward the hospital, the money clutched tightly in her pocket, Richard remained standing on the sidewalk, holding the painting as if it were the most precious thing in the world. His life had just taken a completely new direction, and he had no idea how to handle the emotional devastation that was about to unfold. Richard arrived at his penthouse apartment as the sun set, painting the sky in orange hues that contrasted with the emotional storm raging inside him. Sophia's painting was carefully propped up on the living room's coffee table, and he couldn't stop looking at the image that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. His hands shook as he poured a glass of scotch, the golden liquid reflecting the city lights below. For years, that privileged view had been his reward for success, but now it felt like a gilded cage separating him from the real world, a world where his possible daughter sold art on the street to buy medicine. He walked into his home office, where a framed photo of Marina still occupied a discreet corner of a bookshelf. He had kept the image as a memento of better times, but now it had become evidence of his own negligence. Marina's eyes in the photograph seemed to silently accuse him. "Marina," he muttered to himself. "What have I done?" The memories returned like an avalanche. Their last argument, when she had tried to tell him something important, but he was too busy with preparations for the corporate merger. "We'll talk later, Marina. I can't be distracted right now," he had said, not even looking up from his documents. She had slammed the door on her way out, and he hadn't even cared. In the following weeks, Marina had tried to contact him several times, but he always had his assistant say he was busy. He was immersed in the most important negotiation of his career and had no time for domestic drama. When he finally tried to look for her, he found she had moved, leaving only a temporary address that later turned out to be false. Now, 7 years later, the pieces of the puzzle fit together in a devastating way. Marina had been trying to tell him she was pregnant, but he was too busy to listen. She had left home, carrying not only the pain of rejection, but also the life of his daughter in her womb. Richard picked up the phone and dialed his personal assistant, Carla, who had been with him for over a decade. "Carla, I need you to help me with some urgent research. I want to know everything about a Marina Alvarez, who lives in the annex, especially any information about recent hospitalizations." "Mr. Mason, it's almost 9 o'clock. Can this wait until tomorrow?" "No, Carla, I need this information tonight. It's a personal matter." While he waited for Carla's call, Richard went back to studying Sophia's painting. Each brushstroke seemed to tell a story of love and longing. A 6-year-old child shouldn't have such technique, such expression in her work. Was talent inherited? He had always been good with his hands, used to draw in his youth before business consumed all his time. The phone rang after 2 agonizing hours. "Mr. Mason, I found the information you requested. Marina Alvarez, 31 years old, has been admitted to St. Francis Hospital for 3 months. Grave diagnosis, needs a surgery that costs approximately $150,000. She lives in the annex with her daughter Sophia, age 6, and her mother, a Mrs. Elena Morales, 72. Richard felt the floor drop out from under him. "Carla, were you able to find out who the child's father is?" "There's no information about the father in the medical records. It's just listed as not provided." After hanging up, Richard remained in absolute silence for several long minutes. Marina was dying, and he had enough money to save her without even feeling the financial impact. But how could he approach her? How could he explain he had discovered everything by chance? Through a random encounter with a child selling paintings on the street, he picked up the painting again and noticed something he hadn't seen before. In the bottom right corner, there was a small signature in a child's handwriting. "For the daddy I haven't met yet. With love, Sophia." The tears came without warning, breaking through years of emotional restraint. Sophia had painted this for him without even knowing who he was, even without being sure he existed. She held on to the hope of meeting him someday. Richard fell to his knees on the living room floor, clutching the painting to his chest. All his fortune, all his success, all his business achievements meant nothing in the face of the cruel reality unfolding before him. He was a powerful man who had lost his own family because he was too busy to notice he had one. The night stretched before him like an impossible challenge. For the first time in years, Richard Mason The ruthless millionaire, wept like a lost child, and in his tears was the bitterness of a man who discovered too late that he had traded love for ambition. By morning, he knew his life would never be the same. Sophia had painted not only her mother's face, but also the way back home for a man who had gotten lost in his own arrogance. The only question was whether there was still time for redemption, or if some wounds were too deep to heal. Dawn broke without Richard having slept a wink. He had spent the night pacing his penthouse, alternating between moments of despair and attempts to form a plan. Sophia's painting remained on the coffee table, and with every glance, the hidden message in the corner seemed to shine more intensely. At 7 in the morning, against all his corporate habits, Richard cancelled all his meetings for the day and left his apartment dressed simply: jeans, a t-shirt and sneakers. He needed to see the reality where his possible daughter lived, but he knew he couldn't show up in the annex dressed like the millionaire he was. The neighborhood greeted him with a cacophony of sounds and smells that contrasted sharply with the refrigerated silence of his penthouse. Children ran between tightly packed houses, women hung laundry on makeshift lines, and men prepared for another day of hard labor. Here, life was raw and real. Richard discreetly asked for Mrs. Elena Morales and was directed to a small wooden house at the end of a dirt road. The structure was simple but well kept, with flower pots in the windows and a small vegetable garden out back. When he knocked, a tired voice answered from within. "Who is it?" "Good morning, ma'am. My name is Richard. I'd like to talk to you about some paintings a little girl named Sophia is selling." The door opened slowly, revealing a woman with graying hair and tired eyes that still shone with intelligence. Mrs. Morales studied him with curiosity and a hint of suspicion. "Did you buy something from my granddaughter?" "Yes. I bought a painting yesterday. It's a very beautiful piece, and I'd like to know more about her work." Mrs. Morales invited him in, and Richard found himself in a small but cozy living room where dozens of paintings covered the walls. They were all portraits of Marina in different poses and expressions, smiles, moments of sadness, hopeful gazes. It was as if Sophia were trying to keep her mother's memory alive through her art. "My granddaughter has a special gift," Mrs. Morales said, pouring him a simple but aromatic cup of coffee. "She's been drawing and painting since she was little. When Marina got sick, Sophia started making these portraits. She says this way her mother will never truly be gone." Richard felt a tightness in his chest. "You're raising Sophia by yourself." "Pretty much since she was born. Marina has always been very proud, never wanted to accept help from anyone. She worked as a teacher at a private school, but when she got pregnant, she lost her job. The child's father..." Mrs. Morales paused, and Richard noted the bitterness in her voice. The child's father was an important, wealthy man, but he didn't want anything to do with the pregnancy. Marina tried to talk to him several times, but he never listened. The words hit Richard like daggers. He tried to maintain his composure, but he knew his eyes gave him away. "And do you know who this man is?" "I do. Richard Mason, owner of a big corporation. Marina told me everything. She loved that man, but all he cared about was work. When she found out she was pregnant, she tried over and over to tell him, but he was always too busy. Imagine that. Too busy to hear he was going to be a father." Richard felt nauseous. Hearing his own story told by this elderly woman who had raised his granddaughter in poverty while he amassed a fortune was a torture he didn't know how to bear. This man, does he know he has a daughter? He had no idea until yesterday, Mrs. Morales answered, and Richard froze. "Yesterday, Sophia came home and told me she'd sold a painting to a very elegant man near the hospital. She said he got very emotional when he saw the painting and asked about Marina. She described the man to me and..." The old woman paused, looking directly into Richard's eyes, and I knew immediately who it was. The ensuing silence was deafening. Richard realized he'd been discovered but couldn't find the words to defend or explain himself. "You're him," aren't you?" Mrs. Morales asked, her voice a mixture of pain and hope. "You're my Sophia's father." Richard lowered his head, unable to lie to this woman who had sacrificed so much for his child. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know Marina was pregnant." "You didn't know because you didn't want to know." Mrs. Morales' voice rose, years of frustration and anger finally finding an outlet. "My daughter tried to contact you dozens of times. She called your office, left messages, even went in person twice. But you were always in a meeting, always had something more important." Every word was a true accusation that Richard couldn't contest. He vaguely remembered his assistant mentioning that insistent woman had called several times, but he'd always told her to say he was busy. At the time, he thought Marina was being dramatic, trying to win him back with emotional games. "Mrs. Morales, I made a terrible mistake. There's no way to justify what I did, but now I know the truth. I want to help. I want to truly know my daughter. I want to pay for Marina's treatment." The old woman watched him for several long seconds, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "My granddaughter asks about her father every single day. I always tell her he's a good man who's far away, but that one day he'll come back. I wonder if it's too late for that to be true." Richard felt he was facing the most important moment of his life. The answer he gave now would define not just his future, but the futures of Sophia, Marina, and Mrs. Morales. For the first time in years, he was faced with a decision that money couldn't buy or solve. "It's not too late," he answered, with a conviction that surprised even himself. "I will do everything in my power to be the father Sophia deserves. But first, I need your help to understand how I can approach her without causing more pain." Mrs. Morales smiled for the first time since their conversation began. And in that smile, Richard saw a flicker of the hope that still pulsed in the heart of this family. A family destroyed by his negligence, but that could perhaps be rebuilt by love. Mrs. Morales poured more coffee as she gathered her thoughts. The revelation had created a dense atmosphere in the small room, where Sophia's paintings seemed to silently witness the conversation that would change all their fates. "Sophia doesn't know you're her father yet," the older woman said, slowly stirring sugar into her cup. "To her, you're just the kind man who bought her painting. But she talked so much about that meeting yesterday, said you looked sad and had kind eyes." Richard's heart ached. Even without knowing their connection, Sophia had sensed something in him. A bond that transcended words. How is she handling her mother's illness? With a maturity a 6-year-old shouldn't have, Mrs. Morales replied sadly. "She wakes up every day, asking if today is the day Mommy will get better. She paints her pictures as if each brushstroke is a prayer. And she always says that when her mommy is well, they'll travel to a beautiful place where sadness doesn't exist." Before Richard could respond, the sound of small, hurried footsteps echoed outside. The door flew open and Sophia ran in, her face beaming. "Grandma, Grandma, you won't believe it. The kind man from yesterday was near the hospital again. He bought another painting and gave me $100. Sophia stopped abruptly when she noticed Richard in the living room. "Oh, you're here." The surprise in the child's eyes was genuine, but there was no fear, only curiosity. Richard's hands trembled as he saw his daughter up close again, in her own home, surrounded by the paintings she made with such love. "Hi, Sophia. I came to talk to your grandmother about your paintings. They're truly special." Sophia smiled, still clutching the small pouch where she kept the money. "You really like them. Sometimes I think they're not very good. My mommy is much prettier than I can paint." "Your paintings are perfect," Richard answered sincerely. "You have an extraordinary talent." Mrs. Morales watched the interaction intently, noticing how Sophia's gestures resembled Richard's, the way she tilted her head when she was thinking, the way her hands moved as she spoke. The similarities were subtle, but unmistakable to someone who knew what to look for. "Sophia, show Mr. Mason your other paintings." her grandmother suggested. The girl ran to her room and returned with a stack of canvases, one by one. She displayed her work, explaining each detail with the enthusiasm of a child who had finally found someone interested in her art. This one I painted when Mommy was happy, before she got sick. And this other one is from when she used to tell me stories before bed. Oh, and this one... Sophia held up a painting different from the others. I painted this one thinking about my daddy. Richard felt the world stop. The painting showed a vague male figure, just the outline of a tall man with no defined features. How do you imagine your father? Mommy always said he was a good man, that he worked very hard and would come back to us one day. Grandma says he has kind eyes, just like you. Sophia looked directly at Richard, and he had to fight back tears. And you'd like to meet him. Every day, I pray for God to bring my daddy back. I wish he could meet my mommy and see how beautiful and caring she is. And I wish he would help me take care of her. Sophia's voice grew quieter, filled with a sadness too mature for her age. Mrs. Morales coughed discreetly, signaling to Richard that it was time for him to make a decision. The moment was here. He could remain the kind man who buys paintings, or he could assume his true identity. Sophia, Richard began, his voice trembling, what if I told you that? That your father isn't as far away as you think? The child looked at him with curiosity, not fully understanding. What do you mean? Richard glanced at Mrs. Morales, who gave him an encouraging nod. There was no more putting off the truth. Sophia, I am your father. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Sophia looked at him, then at her grandmother, then back at him. Her small hands clutched the painting of the imaginary father, and Richard could see her mind working to process the information. My daddy! The words came out in an incredulous whisper. Yes, my daughter, I am. Sophia dropped the painting and ran into Richard's arms. He enveloped her in a hug he had waited 6 years to give. The child was crying and laughing at the same time, repeating, my daddy, like a prayer finally answered. Mrs. Morales watched the scene with tears in her eyes, but also with a look of caution. She knew this was only the first step on a difficult journey. Marina didn't yet know that Richard had discovered the truth, and her reaction would be unpredictable. Daddy. Sophia pulled back slightly to look at Richard's face. Are you going to help Mommy get better now? I'll do everything in my power, he promised, sealing a commitment that would change his life forever. But as he held his newfound daughter, Richard couldn't imagine that Marina would react to his presence with a fury that would nearly destroy any chance of a family reconciliation. The reunion with Sophia was just the first hurdle cleared in an emotional battle that was only just beginning. The next 3 days were the most intense of Richard's life. He spent every free moment with Sophia, discovering details about the daughter whose first years he had missed. The girl took him to her favorite spots in the neighborhood, showed him where she sold her paintings, and told him stories about her mother with a mixture of love and worry that broke Richard's heart. Mrs. Morales had agreed not to tell Marina about the discovery until Richard decided on the best way to approach the subject. The delicate situation demanded care, especially given Marina's fragile health. Daddy, can you come with me to visit Mommy today? Sophia asked on Thursday morning, her eyes shining with anticipation. Richard's stomach clenched. He had been dreading this moment, knowing it would be devastating, but also inevitable. Of course, sweetie, let's go visit your mom. The county hospital was a brutal contrast to the private clinics Richard knew. Crowded hallways, endless lines, and the characteristic smell of disinfectant mixed with human suffering. Sophia walked through the corridors with the familiarity of someone who'd been coming here for months, greeting nurses and other patients. Mommy's in room 312, Sophia said, pulling Richard's hand. She gets so happy when I bring people to meet her. When they reached the door, Richard hesitated. Through the glass, he could see Marina lying in bed, visibly thinner and pale, but still possessing the beauty that had captivated him years ago. She was reading a book, and Richard noticed her hands trembled slightly. "Mommy!" Sophia ran in and carefully threw herself into her mother's arms. "I brought someone very special to meet you." Marina looked toward the door and froze when she saw Richard standing in the entryway. The book fell from her hands, and her expression shifted from joy to shock, then to a fury he had never seen before. "What are you doing here?" Marina's voice was low but laced with venom. Sophia looked confusedly between the two adults, sensing the sudden tension in the air. "Mommy, this is Richard. He's my fry. Get out. Now." Marina cut her daughter off, her eyes fixed on Richard with an intensity that could burn. "Marina, please, let me explain." "Explain what? That you found out you have a daughter and now you want to play daddy, that your guilty conscience finally brought you here?" Marina tried to sit up, but her weakness prevented any sudden moves. 7 years, Richard, 7 years of silence. Sophia started to cry, frightened by her mother's reaction. "Mommy, why are you mad at my daddy?" The silence that followed was deafening. Marina looked at her daughter, then at Richard, and the realization of what had happened hit her like a punch to the gut. "You told her?" Marina's voice shook with indignation. "You had the audacity to tell my daughter you're her father without speaking to me first. It wasn't planned. Sophia found me by accident. And when I saw the painting—" "What painting?" Marina forced herself to sit up, ignoring the pain. Sophia, still crying, held up one of the paintings she had brought to cheer her mother up. Marina looked at the portrait of herself and understood immediately how Richard had discovered the truth. "My daughter was selling paintings on the street," Marina said, her voice cracking with pain and humiliation. "My 6-year-old daughter was selling her art on the street to buy my medicine, while you lived in your ivory tower. Marina, I didn't know. If I had known—" "Liar!" Marina screamed, and a nurse appeared at the door, concerned. "I tried to tell you dozens of times. I called, I left messages, I went to your office. But you were always busy, always had something more important." Sophia was sobbing, unable to understand why her parents were fighting. Richard knelt beside the bed and tried to comfort his daughter, but Marina stopped him. "Don't touch her. You lost that right 7 years ago. Please, Marina, I know I made terrible mistakes, but now I want to help. I want to pay for your treatment. I want to take care of Sophia." "With money?" Marina laughed bitterly. "You think you can buy back 7 years of abandonment? You think you can just show up here like a savior when my daughter has already learned to live without you?" "Mommy, please, stop yelling," Sophia pleaded between sobs. Marina looked at her daughter and her heart broke. She pulled Sophia close, trying to calm herself. "I'm sorry, my love. Mommy didn't mean to scare you." "Why are you fighting?" "I don't want you to fight," Sophia whispered. Richard approached cautiously. "Marina, I know you have every reason to hate me, but Sophia isn't to blame for my mistakes. She deserves to have a father in her life, and you deserve the best medical treatment available. And where were you when I needed you? Where were you when I was sick during the pregnancy? Where were you when Sophia was born? Where were you when she had a high fever at age 2 and I spent the whole night in the ER with no money for a cab?" Each of Marina's questions was a stab to Richard's heart. "I was being a selfish fool who didn't know how to value what he had," Richard answered with brutal honesty. "But I know now. Now I want to do things differently." Marina looked at him for several long seconds, then at Sophia, who was holding both their hands with a desperate hope to see her family united. "It's too late, Richard. You lost your chance to be a father, and I won't let you come into her life just to abandon her again when you get tired of playing house." Richard felt the floor give way beneath him. Marina's rejection was more painful than any business failure he had ever faced. But looking at Sophia, he realized he would have to fight like he had never fought before, not for money or success, but for the right to be a father. Richard left the hospital devastated, carrying Sophia, who was crying silently in his arms. Marina's rejection had been a brutal blow, but the pain in his daughter's eyes was even more unbearable. During the drive back to the annex, Sophia remained quiet, occasionally sobbing against her father's chest. "Daddy, why doesn't Mommy like you?" Sophia's innocent question cut through Richard's heart like a razor. "She has her reasons to be hurt with me, sweetie. I made mistakes in the past that hurt your mother very much. But you're here now. Doesn't that count?" Richard kissed his daughter's forehead, unsure how to explain that some wounds are too deep to heal quickly. When they arrived at Mrs. Morales's house, she knew immediately that something had gone wrong. "Marina didn't take the news well," Mrs. Morales said, more a statement than a question. "She forbade me from seeing Sophia again. She said it's too late for me to be a father." Mrs. Morales sighed deeply. "My daughter carries so much pain in her heart, but maybe it's time she knew the whole truth." "What truth?" Richard asked, intrigued. The elderly woman looked at Sophia, who was playing with her colored pencils in the corner. "Sophia, darling, go out to the yard and pick some flowers for Mommy. Take the little basket." When the child had left, Mrs. Morales turned to Richard with a grave expression. "There's something that not even Marina knows. Something that could change everything." A chill ran down Richard's spine. "What do you mean?" "I knew your assistant, Patricia Hayes. We worked together at a hotel many years ago, before she got the job at your company. We kept in touch sporadically." Mrs. Morales paused, as if gathering the courage to continue. 3 years ago, she showed up here drunk after a company holiday party." Richard leaned forward, sensing he was about to discover something terrible. "She was bragging about how she had protected you from gold-digging women. She said she always filtered your calls and had stopped several opportunists from getting to you." Mrs. Morales's voice trembled with indignation. "Patricia confessed that she intercepted all of Marina's attempts to contact you. She called Marina a con artist, trying to pull a pregnancy scam." Richard's world collapsed for the second time in a week. Patricia, she knew about the pregnancy. She knew everything. Marina had explained the situation in detail during one of the calls, begging to speak with you. Patricia not only refused to pass on the message, but she also convinced Marina that you already knew about the pregnancy and had chosen to ignore her. Richard felt sick. For 7 years, he had believed Marina simply vanished from his life out of pride or spite. He never imagined that his own assistant, the woman he trusted to manage his life, had systematically sabotaged any chance of reconciliation. Why would Patricia do that? "She's been in love with you for years," Mrs. Morales revealed. "She thought if she got rid of all the other women, you would one day notice her. It was a sick obsession." Richard remembered small signs he had ignored over the years, the way Patricia looked at him, her irritation when he mentioned dates, how she always found excuses to stay late when he was alone at the office. "Do you have any proof of this?" Mrs. Morales went to an old cabinet and took out a small box. "Patricia was so drunk that night, she confessed everything. I recorded the conversation on my old phone, thinking I might need it someday." She held up an old flip phone and played an audio file. Patricia's slurred voice detailed exactly how she had sabotaged Richard and Marina's lives. The recording was nearly 15 minutes long, and every word was a bomb, exploding the last certainties Richard had. She said you never knew Marina was pregnant, that every time she tried to contact you, she was blocked. Patricia even admitted to shredding letters Marina sent to your office. Richard was shaking with rage and disbelief. "Why did you never tell Marina?" "I tried, but my daughter was so hurt, so convinced that you had knowingly rejected her, that she refused to believe me. She said I was making excuses for you." At that moment, Sophia returned from the yard with a basket full of colorful flowers, humming softly. The child's innocence was a brutal contrast to the devastating revelation that had just changed everything. "Grandma, can I take these flowers to Mommy today?" "Of course, my dear. And you know what? I think your daddy is going to take you to visit your mom again, and this time they're going to have a real talk." Richard looked at Mrs. Morales with gratitude and renewed determination. He finally had a weapon to fight the past, the truth. Patricia had destroyed his family with lies and manipulation, but now he had evidence that could prove his innocence to Marina. "Mrs. Morales, may I have this recording? It's yours. Use it well. Marina deserves to know that the man she loved never willingly abandoned her, and Sophia deserves to have parents who can get along, even if they don't get back together." As Sophia carefully arranged the flowers in the basket, Richard felt a mix of fury and hope coursing through his veins. Patricia had stolen 7 years of his life, 7 years of fatherhood, 7 years of a family that could have been happy. But now, with the truth in his hands, he finally had a real chance to win back Marina's trust and build a future with his daughter. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since discovering he was a father, Richard felt he had the ammunition to win the war against the past and build a future worthy of Sophia's love. Richard spent the entire night planning how to approach Marina with the explosive recording. He knew he had to pick the right moment and the right words, as a clumsy approach could make her dismiss the evidence as a desperate manipulation tactic. The next morning, he arrived at the hospital earlier than normal visiting hours, convincing a nurse to let him in by claiming a family emergency. He found Marina awake, staring out the window with a look of profound melancholy. "I told you not to come back," she said without turning as she heard his footsteps. "Marina, I have something you need to hear. Something that will change everything you think you know about what happened between us. There's nothing you can say that..." "Patricia Hayes intercepted all of your attempts to contact me," Richard interrupted, getting straight to the point. Marina turned slowly, her expression shifting from irritation to confusion. "What are you talking about?" "Your mother recorded a confession from Patricia 3 years ago. She admitted to sabotaging our communication, that she knew you were pregnant and chose to hide it from me because she was in love with me." The ensuing silence was tense. Marina watched him, as if trying to detect an elaborate lie. "That's ridiculous. You're making this up to..." "Listen to the recording." Richard placed Mrs. Morales' phone on the bedside table and pressed play. Patricia's drunken voice echoed through the room, detailing her manipulations. Marina listened in silence, her expression gradually changing from skepticism to shock, then to a fury that rivaled the one she'd shown the day before. "She said you were a con artist," the recorded voice continued, "that you were trying to pull a pregnancy scam on the boss. I convinced her he already knew and had chosen to ignore her. It was easy to make her stop trying." Tears began streaming down Marina's face. Years of pain, humiliation, and resentment were being rewritten in minutes. Everything she had believed about Richard's abandonment was based on the lies of a woman blinded by obsession. "Oh my God," she whispered as the recording ended. 7 years! For 7 years, I believed you didn't care." Richard cautiously approached the bed. "I swear I never knew you were pregnant. If I had, I would have dropped everything to be by your side. All those calls, all those times she said you were busy." Marina covered her face with her hands, sobbing. "I even went to your office twice. Patricia told me you had given specific orders not to let me up. She lied about everything. She lied to me. She lied to you. She destroyed our family out of a sick jealousy." Marina looked at Richard through her tears. "But you never questioned my disappearance. You never tried to find me." "I tried at first," Richard admitted with shame. "But when I couldn't find you at the addresses I had, Patricia convinced me you had moved on, that pushing it would be invasive. She always had a logical explanation. And you believed her." I was hurt and confused. Our last fight had been terrible, and I thought you had really decided you were better off without me." Marina was silent for long minutes, processing the magnitude of the betrayal that had shaped their lives. The woman Richard trusted professionally had systematically destroyed any chance of them reconciling. "Where is Patricia now?" The question was laced with a cold anger. "She still works for me. Or rather, she did. After hearing this recording, I'm firing her today. No. Marina surprised Richard with the firmness in her voice. Don't fire her yet. I want to confront her. In person. I want her to look me in the eye and see what her lies have caused. Richard hesitated. Marina, you're weak. You shouldn't put yourself through that stress. 7 years, Richard. She stole 7 years of a life that could have been different. Sophia grew up without a father because of that woman's lies. I was forced into poverty, to suffer alone, to watch my daughter sell paintings on the street. All because of her. Marina's anger was justified. But Richard feared the confrontation could harm her already fragile health. We can do this when you're stronger. No, I want to deal with this now. I want her to come here and admit what she did while looking at Sophia, explaining to a 6-year-old why she grew up without knowing her father. Richard realized Marina needed this confrontation to process the truth and move forward. All right, but Sophia doesn't need to witness that. She wouldn't understand. You're right. Marina calmed down slightly. But I need to do this, Richard. I need to look that woman in the eye and demand she take responsibility for what she did to us. Then I'll bring Patricia here. But promise me you won't get too worked up. You need to recover. Marina nodded, wiping her tears. There's one more thing we need to talk about. What? Sophia, she's confused and hurt after seeing us fight yesterday. We need to explain what happened to her in a way she can understand. Richard felt an immense relief. For the first time, Marina was talking about us and our daughter, including him in the important decisions. Are you willing to give me a second chance? Marina looked at him for a long moment. I need to process all of this. 7 years of anger don't just disappear overnight, even knowing you were a victim of Patricia's lies. But she paused. Now Sophia deserves to have a father, and maybe we deserve a chance to rebuild our family, even if it's in a different way. Richard felt tears well up in his own eyes. It was the first real sign of hope he'd had since discovering he was a father. I'll do everything right this time, Marina, I promise. Then start by bringing that woman here so I can look into the eyes of the person who destroyed our family. I want to hear from her own mouth what she has to say for herself. Richard nodded. Knowing the confrontation with Patricia was crucial for Marina to finally put the past behind her and build a future where Sophia had both parents in her life. Richard arrived at his office the next morning with steely determination. Patricia was at her desk as always, organizing his schedule with the same efficiency that had masked her betrayal for years. When she looked up to greet him, he saw that her eyes still held the sick adoration he had never noticed. Good morning, Mr. Mason. Today you have the meeting with the Japanese investors at 10 and then... Patricia, I need you to come with me to the hospital, now. Her expression changed instantly. The hospital? Are you all right, sir? It's not for me. It's for you to meet someone. A flicker of suspicion crossed Patricia's eyes. Mr. Mason, I don't understand. Marina Alvarez. Does that name mean anything to you? The color drained from Patricia's face. It was all the answer he needed. Her hands began to shake, and she gripped the edge of her desk for support. I don't know what you're talking about. Lies. Just like all the messages you never passed on, all the calls you intercepted, all the letters you destroyed. Richard's voice was controlled, but filled with an icy rage. Patricia tried to maintain her composure, but was clearly panicking. Mr. Mason, if someone has been saying things about me, you said them yourself. 3 years ago, drunk, bragging about how you protected your family from a gold digger. Remember? The lie crumbled completely. Patricia collapsed into her chair, her face in her hands. How did you find out? That doesn't matter now. What matters is that you're coming to the hospital to explain to Marina, in person, what you did. You're going to look her in the eye and take responsibility for the 7 years of suffering you caused. I can't do that. I was only trying to protect you. Protect me from what? From being a father, from having a family. from being happy. Richard leaned over the desk, forcing Patricia to look at him. You destroyed my life, and the life of the woman I loved because of a sick obsession. Tears streamed down Patricia's face. I've loved you for 10 years. I saw how that woman made you suffer, how she created problems. She was pregnant. She was trying to tell me we were going to have a child. I thought if she was out of the picture, you would finally notice me. The pathology behind Patricia's actions was becoming clear. For years, she had built a fantasy where Richard would one day realize she was the one for him. In her distorted mind, Marina was just an obstacle to be removed. You didn't just destroy my relationship. You made a child grow up without a father. You're responsible for the poverty they endured, for Marina's illness, for everything. I didn't know she was really pregnant at first. I thought she was bluffing. And when you found out she wasn't, Patricia fell silent, unable to answer. The truth was, even after learning of the pregnancy, she had chosen to continue her deceit, betting that Richard would never discover the truth. Get up, Richard ordered. You're coming with me to the hospital now, and you're going to apologize to Marina while looking her in the eye. I'll be arrested. There will be legal trouble. You should have thought of that before. Move. The car ride to the hospital was tense and silent. Patricia sobbed quietly in the passenger seat while Richard drove, his jaw clenched. In the hospital elevator, she made one last attempt to escape. Mr. Mason, I can resign, leave town. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. Marina deserves to look the person who destroyed her family in the eye and hear an explanation. When they entered the room, Marina was sitting up in bed, visibly tense but determined. She looked at Patricia with an intensity that could burn. So, you're Patricia. Patricia couldn't hold her gaze, her eyes immediately dropping to the floor. I'm so sorry. Look at me when you speak, Marina commanded with an authority that surprised everyone. I want you to look me in the eye and explain why you decided you had the right to destroy my family. Forced to lift her head, Patricia met Marina's wounded stare. I was in love with him. I thought. You thought what? That you could play God with our lives, that you could decide my daughter didn't deserve a father. I wasn't thinking about the child, You only thought about yourself, Marina interrupted. My 6-year-old daughter sold paintings on the street to buy my medicine. A child was forced to support her family because you decided your feelings were more important than our happiness. Patricia was sobbing openly. I never wanted it to come to this. I never thought. Exactly. You never thought about the consequences. You never thought about the suffering you would cause. You never thought about anyone but yourself. Richard watched the confrontation in silence, seeing Marina wield a strength he had forgotten she possessed. Even sick and physically fragile, she was showing an impressive dignity and courage. Do you have children, Patricia? Marina asked. But no. Then you can't even imagine what it's like to raise a child alone, watching her ask every day why she doesn't have a father like the other kids. You can't imagine what it's like to make up stories about a father who's traveling when you actually think he just doesn't care. I'm so sorry. I truly am. Your apology doesn't give me back 7 years of my life. It doesn't give back Sophia's first steps that Richard missed, her first words, the nights she cried asking for her daddy. The silence that followed was heavy. Patricia was completely broken, finally understanding the magnitude of what she had done. Marina, on the other hand, seemed to be finding a kind of peace through the confrontation. Now I want you to get out of our lives forever, Marina said with finality, and I want you to carry the weight of what you've done for the rest of your life. Because unlike you, I'm going to get my family back. Patricia staggered out of the room, completely destroyed by the truth of her actions. Richard remained with Marina, and for the first time in days, the silence between them was peaceful. Thank you for giving me the chance to do that, Marina said finally. You needed it, and she needed to own what she did. Marina held out her hand, and Richard took it gently. Now we can start thinking about the future. our future. And Sophia's future. It was the first real step toward healing. The truth had freed them all from the prison of lies Patricia had built. And finally, they could begin to rebuild what should have been protected from the start. The following days brought a palpable change in the atmosphere surrounding the family. Marina, freed from the weight of 7 years of misdirected resentment, began to show a cautious openness toward Richard. He, in turn, used every moment to prove he was no longer the work-obsessed man who had lost everything in the past. Sophia was the first to notice the shift. When Richard arrived at the hospital the next morning, the girl ran to hug him without the awkwardness of the previous days. Marina watched the interaction with a discreet smile, for the first time allowing herself to imagine what it would be like to see father and daughter build a real relationship. "Daddy, today I brought a new painting to show you and Mommy," Sophia said, opening her small backpack with enthusiasm. The painting was different from the others. Instead of a solitary portrait of Marina, it showed 3 figures, a woman, a man, and a child, all holding hands. The colors were more vibrant, and there was something hopeful in the composition that deeply touched both adults. "It's our family," Sophia explained simply. "I dreamed about it last night." Richard felt a lump in his throat. "It's the most beautiful painting you've ever made, sweetie." Marina reached out to gently touch the canvas. "Sophia, would you like our family to be like this?" "More than anything in the world, Mommy. I wish we could all live together, that Daddy would take me to school, and that you would both tell me stories before I go to sleep." The silence that followed was thick with emotion. Richard and Marina exchanged a look, both thinking the same thing. How to build the family Sophia dreamed of, considering all the history of pain between them. "Sophia," Richard said carefully, "how would you feel if I told you that I'm going to take care of your mommy's treatment, that I'm going to make sure she gets completely better?" The girl's eyes lit up. "Really? Mommy's going to get well. I'll do everything in my power," Richard promised. Looking to Marina for approval, Marina nodded slowly. It was the first time she had officially accepted his help, and the gesture did not go unnoticed by Richard. "But there's something we need to talk about," Marina said, addressing her daughter. "Daddy and Mommy are still learning how to be a family again. We might not live together at first, but that doesn't mean you won't have both parents in your life." Sophia furrowed her brow, trying to process the information. "Now, aren't you going to get married again?" The child's direct question caught both adults off guard. Richard looked at Marina, waiting for her to answer first. "We're still figuring out how to be friends again, Sophia. Marriage is something for adults to think about carefully, after a long time of talking and getting to know each other again. But can you try?" The hope in Sophia's voice was touching. "We can try to be a good family for you, even if it's different from what you see in the movies," Richard answered diplomatically. Just then, Dr. Miller, the physician in charge of Marina's case, entered the room with a serious expression. Richard's stomach clenched, fearing bad news. "Marina, I need to talk to you about the next steps in your treatment. You can speak in front of them," Marina said, holding Sophia's hand and looking at Richard. "They're my family." The doctor consulted his chart. "The latest tests show that you need the surgery urgently. We have a 2-week window to perform it, or the situation could become significantly more complicated." "How much does it cost?" Richard asked immediately. "Approximately $150,000, including all procedures and post-operative care. I'll pay for it. When can we schedule it?" Dr. Miller looked at Richard with surprise, then at Marina. "Are you sure? That's a considerable sum." "Doctor," Marina interrupted with a firm voice, "this is my daughter's father, and this surgery is going to happen." Those were Marina's first public words acknowledging Richard's paternity. To him, they sounded like the most beautiful declaration of love. "Excellent. I'll schedule it for next Monday. Marina, you'll need to undergo some pre-op tests over the next few days." When the doctor left, Sophia turned to Richard, her eyes shining. Daddy, is Mommy really going to be all better? I'll do everything to make it so, my daughter. Sophia threw herself into Richard's arms, then ran to hug Marina. Now we can be a real family. Marina looked at Richard over her daughter's head. There was something new in her eyes. It wasn't romantic love, not yet at least, but it was trust. For the first time in 7 years, she believed he had truly changed. Richard, she said when Sophia was distracted with her colored pencils, I want you to know that I'm willing to try. I don't know if we can be a couple again, but I want us to be a family for Sophia. That's all I want too. And Marina, I will prove every day that I deserve a second chance. You already are. That afternoon when Richard left the hospital, he carried a feeling in his chest he hadn't felt in years. True hope. Sophia had painted the future they all deserved, and for the first time, that future seemed possible. But he knew the greatest challenges were still ahead. Marina's surgery would be just the first step. Afterward, they would have to learn to live as a family, with all the adjustments and difficulties that entailed. As he drove home, Richard made a decision that would completely change his life. On Monday, the same day as Marina's surgery, he would step down from running his company to dedicate himself fully to the family he had almost lost forever. The weekend before Marina's surgery was an emotional roller coaster for the whole family. Richard had temporarily moved into a small apartment near the annex, wanting to be close by if they needed anything. Sophia alternated between moments of euphoria, imagining her mother healed, and bouts of anxiety when she thought about the risks of the operation. Mrs. Morales watched everything with the wisdom of someone who had seen much in her life, offering silent but constant support. Her home had become the family's command center, where decisions were made and fears were shared. "Daddy, what if Mommy doesn't get better?" Sophia asked on Sunday night, as Richard helped her organize a new painting. The child's direct question hit Richard like a punch to the gut. He had tried to remain optimistic, but the truth was that Dr. Miller himself had warned about the risks. "Sophia, your mother is a very strong woman, and the doctors are very good at what they do. But you didn't answer my question." The brutal honesty of a 6-year-old was sometimes devastating. Richard knelt beside his daughter, looking directly into her eyes. "If something goes wrong, and I pray that it won't, I promise you that you will always have a father who loves you more than anything in the world. And your grandma Elena will always be here too." Sophia nodded gravely, a premature seriousness on her small face. "And I'll have you forever, even if Mommy goes to heaven." "Forever, my daughter. Nothing in this world will ever take me away from you again." Meanwhile, at the hospital, Marina was facing her own demons. The night before, a surgery is traditionally the hardest for any patient. But for her, it carried the added weight of all the what-ifs that could change Sophia's future. Richard arrived at the hospital at 5 a.m. on Monday, finding Marina awake and visibly nervous. She was sitting up in bed, holding a sealed envelope. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted when she saw him. "It's normal to be nervous, but everything is going to be all right." Marina held the envelope out to him. "I want you to keep this. Only open it if something goes wrong." A chill ran down Richard's spine. "Marina, don't talk like that. I have to. It's a letter for Sophia, explaining everything she needs to know about me, about us, about how she was loved from the very first second of her existence." Marina paused, tears threatening to spill, and instructions on how to take care of her quirks, her fears, the things that make her happy. Richard took the envelope with reverence, as if it were the most precious object in the world. "You're going to give this to her yourself when she turns 18. "Richard, I need to tell you something important." "What?" "I've forgiven you, completely. And it's not just because we found out the truth about Patricia." Marina took his hands. "It's because I see how you look at Sophia, how you've changed your entire life for her. The man I loved is back, only better." Marina's words were a balm to Richard's wounded soul. "I love you, Marina. I never stopped loving you. I know, and when I get out of this surgery, maybe we can talk about rebuilding our love too, not just our family. At 7 a.m., Sophia arrived with Mrs. Morales to say goodbye to her mother before the surgery. The girl had painted a small card with a message in large, childish letters. "Brave Mummy, I love you." "My princess," Marina said, hugging her daughter with a controlled strength so as not to show her own fear. "Mommy's going to take a little nap, and when I wake up, I'll be much better. I'll be waiting here with Daddy and Grandma," Sophia promised solemnly. "And I'll be here when you wake up," Richard added, kissing Marina's forehead. When the medical team came to take Marina to the operating room, the moment became surreal. The entire family gathered around the gurney, each offering their own words of encouragement. "Come back to us soon," Richard whispered in Marina's ear. "Take care of our daughter if I can't," she replied, so softly, only he could hear. "You will, and we'll be here." As the doors to the surgical center swung shut, separating Marina from her family, Sophia began to cry silently. Richard picked her up, and Mrs. Morales held both their hands. There, in the sterile hospital waiting room, 3 generations united in a silent prayer. The next 4 hours would be the longest of Richard's life. He had faced billion-dollar negotiations, devastating corporate crises, decisions that affected hundreds of jobs, but nothing compared to the agony of waiting for news about the woman he loved and the mother of his child. Sophia alternated between restless naps in her father's lap and moments of compulsive painting, creating colorful drawings to show her mother when she woke up. It was her way of coping with anxiety, turning fear into art. At 11:30 a.m., Dr. Miller appeared in the waiting room, still in his surgical scrubs. His expression was carefully neutral, impossible to decipher. "Family of Marina Alvarez." Richard stood up with Sophia in his arms, his heart pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. Mrs. Morales held his arm, drawing mutual strength. "How is she, doctor?" The question came out hoarse from Richard's throat. Dr. Miller looked at Sophia, then at the adults, and finally allowed a small smile to appear on his face. The surgery was a complete success. The relief that followed was so intense that Richard felt his knees buckle. Sophia shouted with joy, Mrs. Morales cried with gratitude, and Richard simply held his daughter tighter, knowing that they finally had a real chance to be the family Sophia had painted in her dreams. Marina woke up slowly in the recovery room, feeling as if she were emerging from a deep, hazy dream. The first thing she saw was Richard's worried face, holding her hand gently. Beside him, Sophia was asleep in a chair, clutching a new painting she had made during the long wait. "How are you feeling?" Richard asked in a whisper, not wanting to wake Sophia. "Alive," Marina answered with a faint smile. "I feel alive." Dr. Miller entered the room just then, carrying a folder with charts and scans. His expression was one of professional satisfaction, mixed with genuine relief. "Marina, the surgery went even better than we'd hoped. We managed to remove all the problematic tissue, and the margins are completely clean. With the follow-up treatment, we'll start next week. Your chances of a full recovery are over 90%. Tears of relief streamed down Marina's face. For months, she had lived with uncertainty, with the fear of leaving Sophia an orphan, with the pain of thinking she would miss the most important years of her daughter's life. "How long until I'm completely cured?" 6 months of treatment plus a few months of follow-up. But you can gradually return to your normal activities starting now. Just then, Sophia woke up and, seeing her mother conscious and talking, leaped from her chair with a cry of joy. "Mommy, you're awake. Look what I painted for you." The painting showed a family of 3 leaving a hospital, all smiling, walking toward a house with a garden full of flowers. It was the visual representation of Sophia's hope, and now it finally seemed possible. "It's beautiful, my love. It's exactly how it's going to be." In the 2 weeks that followed, as Marina recovered in the hospital, The family dynamic changed completely. Richard had officially transferred executive control of his company to a board of directors, retaining only his ownership stake. His priority now was to be present for every moment of Marina's recovery and every important discovery in Sophia's life. Sophia blossomed with the attention of both her parents. Her paintings became more cheerful, her play more spontaneous, and for the first time in her life, she experienced the total security that comes from having a complete family. "Daddy," she said one afternoon while visiting Marina, "when Mommy gets out of the hospital, are we all going to live together?" It was the question that had been hanging in the air for weeks, but that no one had dared to address directly. Richard looked at Marina, seeking guidance. "Sophia," Marina began carefully, "Daddy and Mommy are still relearning how to be a family. Maybe it's better if we start slowly." "What does that mean?" Richard moved closer to the bed and held both Marina's and Sophia's hands. "It means maybe I'll live in a house near you and Grandma Elena at first. That way I can always be close, but you'll have your own space. But I want you to sleep in the same house as me." Sophia's simple honesty forced the two adults to confront feelings they were still processing. Marina looked deeply into Richard's eyes, and he saw not just forgiveness, but the reawakening of something he thought he had lost forever. "Richard," Marina said slowly, "maybe Sophia is right. Maybe it's time we stopped being afraid and started building our family for real." "Are you sure? I don't want you to feel pressured." "I'm sure. These last few days have shown me that you've really changed. You're the man I always knew existed underneath all that ambition." Sophia clapped her hands with joy. "Adi, does that mean we're going to be a real family?" "It means we're going to try," Marina answered, but this time her voice carried a conviction that wasn't there before. That night, after Sophia had fallen asleep in an armchair in the hospital room, Richard and Marina had the most important conversation of their lives. "I need you to know I'm not just doing this for Sophia," Marina said, her voice low but firm. "I still love you, Richard. I never stopped loving you, even when I thought you had abandoned me. I love you more now than I did 7 years ago. I love the incredible mother you've become. I love the strength you've shown. I love how you raised our daughter to be a good person despite all the hardships. Promise me it will be different this time, that when problems come up, and they will, we'll talk instead of pulling away. I promise. And I want you to know I've already taken steps to make that possible." "What steps?" Richard took a deep breath. "I've stepped down from day-to-day operations at the company. I kept my shares, but I won't be working 16-hour days anymore. I want to be present for everything, for Sophia's playtime, for her school recitals, for our talks before bed." Marina was silent for several long seconds, processing the magnitude of what Richard was saying. He had given up what had always been his top priority in favor of his family. What if you regret it? What if you miss the power, the adrenaline of the business world? Impossible. I've discovered something worth far more than any business deal in the world. My daughter's smile when she sees me come home, and the feeling of sleeping next to the woman I love. Marina leaned forward and kissed Richard softly. It was their first kiss in over 7 years, and it carried within it the full weight of forgiveness, second chances, and the promise of a future built on solid ground. "Then let's be a family," she whispered against his lips. In the armchair beside them, Sophia slept, clutching the painting she'd made of the family leaving the hospital. In the child's dreams, they were already walking toward the house with the flower garden, where they could finally live the life they had always deserved. The moment of truth had come and gone, leaving in its place the certainty that sometimes the most beautiful stories are born from endings that seemed impossible. 3 months after Marina's surgery, the family's life had completely transformed. Richard had kept his promise, finding a house not far from the annex, but large enough to house the entire family, including Mrs. Morales, who had refused to live apart from her granddaughter. The house was simple by the luxury standards Richard was used to, But it had something no penthouse could offer. It was filled with life, laughter, and real love. It had a large yard where Sophia could play and paint outdoors, a spacious kitchen where Mrs. Morales prepared her traditional recipes, and a studio set up especially for Sophia's art. Marina had fully recovered and returned to teaching, this time at a public school near their home. She discovered a renewed passion for her work, especially since she could come home every day to find Richard playing with Sophia in the garden. "Daddy, look what the new teacher taught my class." Sophia ran to Richard one sunny afternoon, carrying a watercolor painting. "What a beautiful painting, sweetie. You're getting better and better. The teacher said I have a special talent and maybe one day I can have a real exhibition." Richard smiled, but a shadow of concern crossed his eyes. In recent months, he had noticed Sophia still occasionally gave away or sold her paintings for $1 or $2, despite having no financial need. When he asked about it, she would always say she liked making other people happy with her paintings. "Sophia, you know you don't have to sell your paintings anymore, right? Daddy and Mommy can buy you anything you need." "I know, Daddy. But there's a lady at the bakery who's always sad, and when I show her my paintings, she smiles. And Mr. Henderson from the market said my painting of his grandma reminded him of when he was a boy." Richard realized his daughter had developed something rare and precious, the ability to use her talent to bring joy to others, not out of need, but out of natural generosity. It was a lesson that he, with all his life experience, was still learning. That night, after Sophia was asleep, Richard and Marina sat on the porch, watching the stars. It was a ritual they had adopted, to talk about their day, about Sophia, about their plans for the future. "Have you noticed how Sophia still loves to share her paintings?" Marina asked. "I've been thinking about that. I think she's discovered something it took me 50 years to learn." "What's that?" "That true satisfaction doesn't come from accumulating things for yourself, but from using what you have to make other people's lives better." Marina took Richard's hand. "She learned that from watching you these past few weeks. The way you helped Mr. Antonio's family with their medical bills, how you paid for Mrs. Rosa's daughter's college tuition." Richard had discovered a new way to use his wealth. Instead of acquiring more companies and properties, he began identifying families in need in their community, offering discreet but meaningful help. Sophia always accompanied him on these visits, learning that having resources also meant having a responsibility. "Sometimes I think Sophia is wiser than both of us put together," Richard admitted. "She's our teacher," Marina agreed. "She taught us that family isn't about perfection, it's about presence." A month later, the family received an unexpected visit. Dr. Miller showed up at their house on a Saturday afternoon, but not for a medical consultation. He brought a proposal that would once again change the course of their lives. "Marina, I'm here because the hospital is creating a new psychological support program for patients, families. We wanted to invite you and Richard to coordinate the project." "Us?" Marina asked, surprised. "You've been through a unique experience. You know what it's like to face a serious illness, but you also know what it's like to rebuild a family. Many families who pass through the hospital need that kind of guidance." Richard and Marina looked at each other. It was an opportunity to turn their painful experience into something positive for others. "Would it be a volunteer position?" Richard asked. "Mostly, yes, although the hospital offers a symbolic stipend, but I imagine for you, the reward would be something else." "We accept," Marina said without hesitation, and Richard nodded immediately. But there's one condition," Richard added with a smile. "Sophia participates too. She has a special talent for cheering up sad people." Dr. Miller laughed. "Actually, I was hoping you'd suggest that. I've already heard about her magic paintings." That night, Sophia was beaming when she heard the news. "So we're going to help other families be happy like ours." "Exactly," Marina answered. "We're going to teach them that even when things get tough, there's always hope. And I'll paint pictures for the sad kids in the hospital. Mrs. Morales, who had been listening from the kitchen, appeared in the living room, wiping her hands on her apron. You know you've chosen the right path when you feel you're exactly where you're supposed to be. It was true. For the first time in their lives, every member of this rebuilt family felt they were fulfilling their purpose. Richard had discovered that true success wasn't measured in dollars, but in lives positively touched. Marina had learned that true love overcomes any obstacle when there is honest communication. Sophia continued to be the light that guided them all, proving that sometimes children are the best teachers. The hospital program was set to begin the following week, but that night was special for the family. Sitting in their simple but cozy living room, each working on their own projects, Marina grading papers, Richard reading about family therapy, Sophia painting, and Mrs. Morales knitting, they had finally found the peace they had been searching for. The painting that had started their entire journey was framed on the main wall, no longer a symbol of separation and pain, but a reminder that sometimes miracles come disguised as impossible coincidences. The family was complete, healed, and ready to help other families find their own way back to love. A year after that chance meeting near the hospital, the Mason Alvarez family was gathered for a very special moment. Sophia, now 7, had been invited to her first art exhibition at a local gallery. The event was not just a celebration of the girl's talent, but a testament to how art can transform lives and connect hearts. The small gallery was filled with people whose lives had been touched by Sophia's paintings over the months. The lady from the bakery was there, having bought the first painting that made her smile after losing her husband. Mr. Henderson from the market brought his wife to see the painting that had made him cry with nostalgia for his childhood. Dozens of families from the hospital support program were also present, many carrying small works Sophia had created especially for their children. "Mommy, there are so many people," Sophia whispered to Marina, a mix of nervousness and joy in her voice. "They're all people you've made happy with your art, my love," Marina replied, adjusting the new dress Richard had insisted on buying for the occasion. Richard watched the scene with an emotion that transcended any business success he had ever experienced. His daughter, at 7 years old, had already learned the secret he had taken decades to discover, that true wealth lies in touching lives in a positive way. Mrs. Morales, elegant in her navy blue dress, circulated through the gallery, accepting compliments and telling stories of her granddaughter's precocious talent. At 73, she could finally rest, knowing she had raised not just a talented artist, but a united and thriving family. "Ladies and gentlemen," the gallery owner announced, "I'd like to invite the young artist to say a few words about her work." Sophia looked at her parents for encouragement. Richard lifted her into his arms and carried her to the front of the gallery, where a small microphone had been set up. "My name is Sophia, and I like to paint because painting makes people happy," she began with the characteristic simplicity of a child. "I learned that when you use what you know how to do to help others, you get happy too. And when everyone is happy, the world is a more beautiful place." The audience applauded emotionally. Many had tears in their eyes, touched by the simple wisdom of a child who had learned too early what it was to fight for life, but also what it was to be loved unconditionally. "I want to show you my favorite painting," Sophia continued, pointing to a large canvas at the center of the exhibition. "I painted this one to show that sometimes families break, but they can be glued back together and become even stronger." The painting depicted a family of 3 at the moment they found each other. It wasn't technically perfect, but it carried an emotion so intense it was impossible to look at it without being moved. The figures were embracing, and in the background was a hospital, a simple house, and a giant rainbow arching over the entire scene. "This painting tells our story," Sophia explained, "and it shows that when people truly love each other, they always find a way to be together." When Sophia finished speaking, the entire gallery erupted in applause. Richard and Marina hugged, knowing their daughter had become not just an artist, but a little philosopher of life. Later, after the guests had departed and the family was walking home, Sophia held one of each of her parents' hands, swinging between them as she used to. "Daddy, Mommy, I'm happy you found each other again," she said suddenly. "We are too, sweetie," Richard replied, squeezing her small hand. "Very happy. And you know what? I think it was my first painting that brought you back together." Marina smiled. "You're right. That painting was magic." "All my paintings are magic," Sophia declared with the confidence of someone who had discovered her superpower, "because they're made with love." When they got home, Mrs. Morales had already prepared a special dinner to celebrate the success of the exhibition. The table was set with the fine china that rarely left the cabinet, and there was even a small cake decorated with colorful, edible paints. "To our little artist," the grandmother said, lighting the candles. As Sophia blew out the candles, making a secret wish, Richard and Marina looked at each other across the table. They didn't need words to know they were thinking the same thing, how they had come so far from that dreary afternoon near the hospital. "Grandma," Sophia said after eating a piece of cake, "can I tell you my wish?" "Of course, dear. I wish that all the families in the world could be as happy as ours, and that I can keep painting pictures that make people smile." Mrs. Morales hugged her granddaughter, her eyes shining with pride. "I'm sure your wish will come true." That night, after Sophia had fallen asleep, Richard and Marina sat on their porch, watching the stars and reflecting on the extraordinary journey they had traveled. "Did you ever imagine we would get here?" Marina asked, her head resting on Richard's shoulder. "Honestly, no. But now I understand that everything we went through was necessary to turn us into the people we needed to be." Sophia taught us that true love isn't about perfection. It's about forgiveness, growth, and always choosing each other. Richard kissed the top of Marina's head, and she taught us that sometimes the most precious gifts come wrapped in the most unlikely circumstances. Inside the house, Sophia slept, clutching the original painting she had made of her mother, the one that had changed everything. Beside her bed, dozens of other paintings showed the evolution of a family that had been lost and found, broken and rebuilt stronger than before. The canvas of the lives of Sophia, Richard, Marina, and Mrs. Morales was finally complete. It was a masterpiece made not of paint and brush, but of love, forgiveness, second chances, and the understanding that true wealth is not what we accumulate, but what we share. And so, as the city slept around the small house not far from the annex, a family that had discovered the secret to true happiness rested in peace, knowing they had turned their pain into purpose, their separation into union, and their story of near loss into a living testament that it's never too late to choose love. The painting of their lives would continue to be created each day, with new colors, new smiles, and the certainty that the best chapters were still to come.